So hello everyone, my name is Jessie Lan and I'm a part of the planning committee for this year's symposium. And before we get started with our closing remarks speaker, I would like to let you know that this session is being recorded and is intended to be published on the symposium website. So please modify your name and or turn off your video if you do not wish to be recorded. We ask attendees to keep their audios off unless being prompted to speak. And please submit any questions that you may have through chat. There will be a Q&A session towards the end. And with that, I would like to officially welcome you to the closing remarks session and our last session for the Tufts Research and Data Symposium 2022. First of all, on behalf of the planning committee, I would like to thank you all for participating in the Research and Data Symposium for Food and Nutrition this year. Thank you so much for your engagement, thoughtful questions, and wonderful discussions. It has been our pleasure and privilege to have all of you join us this week. We're so glad to have more than 1,000 registrants from over 100 universities and 200 professional organizations join us from across the globe, especially during this unprecedented times. With this being our second virtual conference due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, we continue to see the importance of nutrition and public health. We know that food, nutrition, and public health issues are reflected in so many different ways in our day-to-day life and is something that deserves our continuous attention, especially with what we've seen in the pandemic and the current affairs and crises that are ongoing. During our conference this year, we had more than 20 sessions, 60 speakers coming from academia, government agencies, industries, as well as nonprofit organizations. We are all brought together by the goal of tackling challenges and complexities within the food, nutrition, and public health space, and with the hope of advancing the field through data and research. So thank you again for being here. With that, I'm delighted to be introducing our final speaker for today and for this year's symposium, Dr. Sara Folta. Dr. Sara Folta is an associate professor and the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion at the Friedman School of Nutrition, Science and Policy at Tufts University. Her research interest focuses on community-based strategies for improving dietary intake, physical activity, and body composition. She has particular expertise in behavioral psychology, communications, and qualitative methods. A major line of her research involves community-based interventions to improve heart health among women with a focus on Black women. She serves as Director of Integrating Underrepresented Populations in Research for the Tufts Clinical and Translational Science Institute. Dr. Folta received a BA in Biology from Middlebury College, an MS in Cell and Molecular Biology from the University of Vermont, and a PhD in Nutrition from Tufts University. Welcome, Dr. Folta.
Thank you very much, Jessie, and thank you to all the organizers of this really wonderful symposium. It's been a really great several days of a lot of stimulating talks and wonderful information. So thank you all for the work that was put in, and I'm delighted to be here. So for this concluding talk, I would like to pick up on things that Dr. Allison Brown touched upon in the opening remarks to the symposium. And specifically, I'm going to pick up the thread of who is left out of nutrition research, the research enterprise, as researchers and as study participants. And I'll talk about equity in research and training. And it's important as I go through to consider these things in terms of something that Allison talked about a lot as well, which is the social determinants of health, and as she described in the symposium. So I'll give a reminder of those and their importance in inclusion. Also, I'll give examples of some solutions that we're doing at the Friedman School of Nutrition, as well as equity research that we're conducting at the Friedman School. So to start, who's left out of studies? And this is, Dr. Allison Brown showed some of this information as well in the opening remarks, but this is just one example of disparities in, there's many health-related disparities, cardiovascular disease being one of them. And again, a reminder that these disparities have to be looked at in terms of the social determinants of health. So it's important to consider access. So access to education, healthcare, to neighborhoods and communities that support health, and to economic stability. And these larger factors are all influenced by even greater factors, notably structural racism. And so these disparities cannot be looked at outside of those larger forces. So to the point of who's left out of research. So the participation to prevalence ratio described here, basically those dotted lines in the middle between 0.8 and 1.2 is the sweet spot. So that's where, if you have the 0.8 to 1.2, that indicates that the people who are in studies are, people who have a condition are represented in studies. So basically, if you're below that, then there's underrepresentation in research studies for these conditions. And if you're above that, you're overrepresented in research studies. And so this is pretty stark and clear, showing the underrepresentation of Black US residents in disease conditions that affect them disproportionately. And the issue with this, of course, is that the standard of care is based on randomized controlled trials that have actually failed to fully represent them. This is the case not only with Black residents, but also women and elderly patients, and other racial ethnic groups are also underrepresented in a lot of the trials that are conducted in the United States. So that impacts the standard of care. There's a lack of adequate data for these relevant subgroups, and that challenges the integrity of algorithms that are used for clinical care. It also raises serious questions about the ability to achieve safety and positive outcomes across all populations. And these are drug trials, which is not typically what we do in nutrition research, but there's good data kept and reviewed for these trials. So looking at piecemeal data in other areas, a similar picture appears to emerge. Even when participants are in a study, their specific data may be missing. And this is a commentary by Yelena Nomova, who's here and will wrap up the conference. And her point is that even that this differential missingness that is considered to be at random, that probably isn't. So in this paper, Yelena suggests that there's a number of things that we need to pay attention to. So for example, the way we code demographics, including, for example, gender, may not reflect the fluidity of gender, race, ethnicity. There's issues when people consider themselves multiple race ethnicities. As Allison mentioned, race ethnicity doesn't reflect the heterogeneity in specific categories, and the categories don't always reflect how people identify themselves. And so because of those problems, things may just go missing. People may not answer the question because the question is not relating to their identities. Questions are also left blank when they're poorly structured or confusing. They may not be well translated into other languages or not written in plain language, or they may be left blank when there's stigma associated with questions. So all may contribute to this non-random missingness, and so a lack of data. So even when people are filling out the questionnaires, their perspective may be specifically missing. from the data. And as Yelena points out, this will likely be exacerbated, or there's great potential for exacerbation of this as more data are collected digitally and analyzed by AI. And there's a promise to address these issues, but there's also the potential to exacerbate. So it's going to require commitment to ensure that the data does serve everyone, transparency and engagement of all stakeholders. So just some thoughts about ways to address this issue of who's missing from research, things that we do at Tufts. One of the #1 ways that's known in the literature and by experience is community engagement. So the more that research studies are designed and conducted in partnership with communities and with people who are affected by conditions, the greater the chance that they will be represented in those studies. At Tufts, we have the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, the CTSI. A lot of universities across the US have a CTSA or some version of the CTSI, and those are opportunities to offer support. So at Tufts, we have recruitment and retention support. The component that I co-direct with Dr. Linda Hudson, integrating underrepresented populations in research, so specifically working to address these issues and helping PIs to do that, and then stakeholder and community engagement, helping research teams to engage in the best way, in an authentic way with communities, again, to make sure that there's this true partnership and potential for good representation. It also, as it indicates there, it takes planning. So a lot of times what will happen is someone will plan a study, write a grant, submit it, and then when it comes to actually recruiting, there hasn't been that thought and attention put into reaching underrepresented populations, and that often will take more in the way of budget and time and real deliberate planning to do so. So the more that researchers are able to do that up front, even in the grant proposal process, the better ability to really enact those plans once the grant is received and do the strategies that we know really do work to enhance inclusion. So the second part that I wanted to talk about is who's left out of the research workforce. And so some of the points here, Black students are reasonably well represented in the natural science fields, but are increasingly lost through that pipeline. So you see as the pipeline goes through to graduate school and on to receiving a research, becoming faculty, receiving a research award, there's loss at all points thereafter. Another point here is that this is for the biological sciences as an example. However, as Allison Brown noted in the opening keynote, only 2.6% of RDs are Black. So there's obviously differences in the different fields, and so there's attention that needs to be paid across fields. Also, as Allison discussed, again, thinking of those social determinants of health and what's leading to this, things like generational wealth and student loan debt, things that she talked about. And as I know probably graduate students can relate to, it's hard to be a graduate student if you don't come from that privileged background. It's delaying the ability to earn a living. Sometimes there's a need to support family members. And there's definitely not that safety net of family always to, when there's not generational wealth, there's the family support may be missing. And so the ability to get through graduate school is very tied to those social determinants. So just to mention what a solution that we have here at the Friedman School of Nutrition, As Allison mentioned, access to quality education is one of the social determinants of health, and differential access itself is a result of racism. Here I'm going back to the beginning of that pipeline and the importance of increasing exposure of underrepresented groups to nutrition and other STEM fields. This is a program that was created by one of our master's students at the Friedman School, Ricardo Moreno, and he had some experience working in Boston public schools and became well aware of the creativity, the potential, the great wealth of intelligence and that existed among his students. And here in Boston, we have so many well-known world-class universities, and they seemed inaccessible to his students that were just a couple of miles away. And so he developed this program, and also that issue of students of color not going into nutrition. And so this program is a pipeline program that matches Friedman School faculty, staff, students, helps them with college preparation, helps them to understand how to apply to college, SAT preparation, things like that, and exposes them to the field of nutrition as a discipline and as a career choice at the same time. So it really makes those connections, those early connections that will hopefully expose students to the wonderful field of nutrition. And also letting our Friedman School community connect with students who are basically right in our backyard and learn more about them as well. So it's a wonderful program, again, developed at the initiative of one of our students. Okay, so again, who's left out of, or who falls out of this pipeline? And there's certainly a lot to talk about at all points of that pipeline. In the interest of time, I'm actually going to jump here to the end of the pipeline, and this is differences in NIH funding. And there's obviously all kinds of other types of funding, especially in the field of nutrition and other types of nutrition-related search, but this gives an overall sense of what's going on, looking at a major federal funder in the US. And to their credit, NIH actually does collect data and has at least some level of transparency regarding disparities in funding. So I won't walk exactly through all of these, but I think this is a good visual indicating the disparities in funding that exist. So again, it's clearly a problem, and kudos to NIH for being transparent about it. Now we need solutions. Taking a closer look at these disparities, the investigators of this study, Hopp et al., found that Black African-American applicants for federal funding tend to propose research on topics with lower award rates. So that seemed to account for at least some of this disparity in funding. And these topics include research at the community and population level, such as disease prevention and intervention, as opposed to more fundamental and mechanistic investigations. The latter tends to have higher award rates. So the topic choice alone seems to account for over 20% of the funding gap after controlling for multiple variables, including the applicant's prior achievements. So hopefully these word clouds are telling a story as well, thinking about in the clusters, the A clusters. These are the clusters with the highest percentage of applicants from African-American Black scientists, and the B clusters are from topic clusters with actually no applications from African-American or Black scientists. So that's an issue. So since the R01 mechanism allows scientists to request support in research of areas to their interest, so they're investigator initiated, these applications provide a window into the priorities of the applicants and the reviewers. So from the previous slide, you're getting a picture of what those priorities are and what is left out. And this is not directly nutrition related, but it's a clear and stark example of the fact that areas of concern to people of color receive less funding. So this is sickle cell versus cystic fibrosis. So looking here, I've highlighted the prevalent or the incidence in the population versus the NIH funding per person affected. So, so clear example of the fact that things that people of color care about are not getting priority funding or not prioritized in funding. So in other words, I'm trying to make the case that in an investigator initiated system, if we're lacking voices as in the investigator pool, then we're missing things that need to be researched. So I'm going back to this solution, which is community engaged research. Of course, the first solution is to work towards increased representation in the workforce. And we absolutely need to work towards that. In the meantime, community engagement is a way to ensure that topics being studied best represent the concerns of everyone affected. So scientists, the current scientists in the research enterprise need to partner with community organizations and really be involved in communities and those affected by the conditions that they study to better understand the priorities. And so they're bringing not just their own interests and agenda forward, but also bringing forward the community priorities. We also need to, again, work to increase inclusion in the scientific community. And this was an article recently from Inside Higher Ed about You Never Stop Being First Generation. And the article mentions that, I think there's a lot of emphasis put on being first generation in the undergrad experience. The article makes the point that being first generation doesn't ever really stop. So as people go through undergrad to grad school to becoming an assistant professor and applying for funding, the first generation issues don't really go away. They change, but they remain. And so the solutions are strong mentoring throughout the pipeline. So we need to continue to focus on the undergrad experience, but not end there, and really focus throughout graduate school and junior faculty as well. Also, transparent communication of policies, particularly in schools and departments, having very transparent policies about tenure and promotion, for example, so that there's no hidden curriculum and that everyone has an equal opportunity to do their best and succeed. We also need to increase scientific inclusion in scientific community in terms of thinking globally. So that's been a theme at this conference and something I also want to talk about, not just in the US, but thinking worldwide in terms of increasing inclusion. And this is work done by Park Wilde at the Friedman School and others. And it relates to academic conferences, which are opportunities to showcase work, to network, to make new collaborations. And there are multiple barriers to participation for women, underrepresented groups, and those with disability, including expense, caretaking, lack of accessibility, and so forth. So taking this international perspective, the expense can leave out scientists from low and middle income countries. And many organizations have actually started implementing reduced membership prices and conference registration fees for people from low and middle income countries. But the expense of travel remains an issue. And what Parks research indicates here, they looked at the impact of moving an International Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health Academy Week conference online, specifically, of course, for the pandemic, but they were interested both how that might reduce barriers to participation and increase equity in participation, among other things. They also looked at sustainability and saw that it reduced aviation-related greenhouse gas emissions. And I think sustainability is another theme we've heard throughout the symposium. It clearly enhanced geographical outreach overall among the low and middle income countries. For LMICs, the proportion was lower, but the absolute number of participants increased. There were 71 countries represented compared to a max of 37 in the years before. They saw that satisfaction in participation in the conference remained high, and the only downside was that social event participation decreased. And it was also harder, they found, to, of course, accommodate all time zones. But overall, there were some major benefits in terms of equity and participation. Now I'm going to turn my attention to some equity-focused research at the Friedman School. And I'm going to give a little bit of a whirlwind tour of examples on a range of topics and ways that we can ensure that equity is ingrained into research and programming. So first, I'd like to highlight a relatively new study, the Lasting study. And again, sustainability has been a theme of the symposium. Lasting is a new interdisciplinary project based at the Friedman School that aims to shine a light on existing gaps in diet sustainability research and policy translation. And essentially, the idea here is that sustainability encompasses 4 pillars: the environment, health, economic, and social. A lot more is known about the unsustainability of current diets in terms of health and environmental impacts, and that's what we hear a lot about. And this study is going to focus additionally on social and economic dimensions of diet sustainability, which often is omitted. And what that means is social outcomes relates to things like the labor that it takes to provide food security, often dangerous and low wage labor. So considering those factors in sustainability, and they'll conduct analyses related to diet sustainability in all these 4 areas. So, and how they're all linked. So it's really expanding the idea of sustainability, looking at these social and economic factors as well. So the next area to highlight is the New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. And this is affiliated with the Friedman School of Nutrition. It started in 1998 to help socially disadvantaged farmers, particularly immigrant and refugee populations, get access to land, apply their knowledge of specialty and ethnic crop production to local conditions, gain financial literacy and business training, access to competitive marketing opportunities, connect with USDA resources, and strengthen local food security, and so forth. So New Entry was one of the first initiatives of its kind nationwide and has successfully supported over 500 immigrant, refugee, veteran, and other socially disadvantaged and otherwise underrepresented producers. So they have a lot of exciting things going on, including a new grant starting this month that New Entry is a part of. And well, this is more programming than research per se. They have all their activities have equity at their core. So New Entry is going to be doing things like conducting outreach to Massachusetts racially diverse producers and other underserved farmers, and beginning and sharing information and technical assistance, sharing deliverables, engaging in networking and connecting them to USDA programs and services. They're also going to support the development of training curricula, workshops, educational events. They'll provide training and technical assistance to racially diverse farmers to address climate resilience. And I feel like that's an overall theme too, that really that connection between sustainability and equity. So they'll also host regional farmer-to-farmer information exchanges and networking, produce short videos featuring racially diverse farmers, and develop case studies on their approaches to climate resilience with strategies, challenges, innovations, and so forth. So really exciting new program that's just beginning. At the Friedman School, there's also a lot going on with food as medicine, and certainly there's others who have also demonstrated, as well as researchers at the Friedman School who have consistently demonstrated that population disparities in diet quality have persisted or worsened for most dietary components. And these are drivers of the health outcomes that we see. So acute crises like COVID further highlight the strains and gaps in nutritious food, in access to nutritious foods for many Americans, and the stark consequences of food insecurity and the unequal rates of that was certainly highlighted in COVID-19. There is growing evidence that the healthcare system can provide a key role in addressing the social determinants of health, including food and nutrition insecurity. And there's a compelling body of evidence that integrating food and nutrition to healthcare, which is food as medicine, is associated with improved health outcomes and reduced healthcare utilization and costs. So there's a lot of work going on regarding this at the school currently, including an evaluation of produce prescription programs in partnership with Wholesome Wave, with the lead PI Fangfang Zhang, and Sean Cash is involved in that. And that's funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. There's also a couple of exciting grant proposals that have gone in very recently. One taking this idea of the produce prescription program, bringing it to pregnant women, also led by Fangfang Zhang, and medically tailored meals. And these are fully prepared, nutritionally tailored, usually home delivered healthy meals for persons living with costly diet sensitive conditions such as diabetes, heart failure, and so forth. So the Friedman School is one of the leaders in a consortium of academic and community-based institutions to assess the impacts of medically tailored meals on various outcomes, and recently put in proposals to do even more of this. So continuing this whirlwind tour, just a couple more things to highlight. So we also at the Friedman School do community-based programming for priority populations, including two of my own studies, the Change Club study, which Allison Brown actually was involved with when she was at the Friedman School. And that's going through a curriculum that has groups of Black women coming together, learning how to assess their environment, assess the built environment, and takes them through a civic engagement curriculum where they decide a project to work on to improve nutrition and nutrition and physical activity access within their own communities. So they assess their community, decide an issue to address, and then they go forth and work on that project. And they also get some nutrition and physical activity education woven into that. And what we saw was this focus on creating healthier communities actually has benefits for the women who are participating. I'm also in one of my other studies is Healthy Hearts for an Abundant Life, which is a cultural adaptation of Strong Women, Healthy Hearts. And also I'll highlight You're the Mom, which harnesses the power of social media to address health disparities linked to nutrition. And this, the priority audience here is Black and Latina moms and with children ages 3 to 12, and it's helping moms to help their children eat healthier, again, using social media, and Christina Economos is the PI. And I'd also like to highlight some student-driven equity research. And I feel like this, in addition to the symposium, this work really highlights the compassion, energy, that our students have, and this also represents their desire to work together during the pandemic and during lockdown, especially the leadership of doctoral students Ryan Simpson and Emily Sanchez. And this study involved nearly 20 students and resulted in a number of presentations at national and international conferences and several publications. And they decided to take on a study to investigate the association between food insecurity and socioeconomic factors in the US during the COVID-19 pandemic, and also wanted to identify the most vulnerable populations. So what they saw here was, or what they saw in that study was nearly 1/4 of surveyed persons had, and they use CDC, the Census Household Pulse Survey data set. They saw that nearly 1/4 of persons surveyed had insufficient or undesirable household foodstuffs. And they also found that non-Hispanic Black men and women aged 25 to 39 were most vulnerable to food insecurity during the pandemic, followed by Black women aged 40 to 54 years and multiracial women aged 25 to 54. So really looking at who was differentially impacted by the pandemic and food insecurity. And this is really important work. Obviously the USDA kept tabs on this as well, but it's important to disaggregate data and really look at who is most impacted. And the students really banded together and did that early on. And to finish up, so there was a session that highlighted some of the Feinstein International Center's work. If you attended the talk on nutrition resilience yesterday, and just to highlight some more of their equity related work, the 4A's is a global consortium of universities conducting research and real-time analyses related to anticipatory actions to mitigate crises in areas affected by climate shocks. So again, that link between climate and equity. And the goal is to improve assistance to vulnerable communities across the world. And it brings together researchers from the global north and the global south. The Leave No One Behind study explores how to prevent and respond to early marriage during conflict and humanitarian crises. And the research includes interviews with displaced female youth in South Sudan and Iraq, many of whom married as children, and it's providing new insights into experiences, needs, challenges, and opportunities faced by female youth in displacement settings. The mapping study is aiming to map the capacities of humanitarian research institutions in the global south. These are often at the forefront of research on humanitarian crises in many areas of the world. And doing this mapping will help highlight their work, facilitate partnerships, and advance knowledge in this critical field. So again, a theme of sustainability and a theme of needing to think about equity from a global perspective. So just to wrap up, there are a number of things that can be done to achieve inclusion in nutrition and public health research. Just highlighting again, these important ones involve high school students, start that pipeline early, engage in strong mentoring at each step, ensure representation in the range of topics, increase research participation by underrepresented people, and community engagement also is very important in making sure that the research being done represents the priorities of communities. And with that, I will stop.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful and informative presentation, Dr. Folta. So we now have some time left for Q&A. Anyone in the audience, if you do have questions, please submit them via chat. And then I guess to start us off, I have a couple of questions. So going back to your point about representation in clinical trials, research studies during your presentation, we know that the research results that come out of these studies directly influence standards of care, and with disease prevalence, reactions to drugs, effectiveness of treatments likely differ within racial ethnic groups, age groups, sex and genders, and especially thinking about the emerging field of precision nutrition and precision medicine, where most of the times these interventions or recommendations are based on the data that's being fed into the algorithms. What are ways or potential actionable items or even solutions to increase the representation in these studies and trials to get that representation of those underrepresented groups to ensure the external validity of findings and results of studies?
Great. Thank you, Jessie. And so it really does take planning. There are known best practices for achieving representation in research, and researchers really do need to start at the proposal stage. It often takes resources, it takes time, and there are a lot of good, well-known strategies and evidence-based strategies to do that, but it takes time and planning. And again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of developing relationships with communities and having ongoing, long-lasting relationships. So not like coming in and saying, I need 3 of this type of person or something equally horrible, but really having genuine relationships with communities so that there's a two-way street. And of course, the more a researcher is responding to the needs of communities, the more willing communities will be to participate in those studies. And to me, it's, there's often this issue of trust, like, oh, there's an issue, it's an issue of trust. And it's put as if the problem is these underrepresented communities having a trust issue. It's not their issue, it's our issue. It's our issue to be trustworthy. And so we have to engage genuinely and develop these relationships and prove ourselves trustworthy to them, not expect them to trust us.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that. And I see some questions popping up in the chat. So Helen wants to know, how does the school support students of color doing research in food and nutrition equity? And Helen says, from my experience as a UC Berkeley student, it's often ironically the more privileged white students being more articulate about the dynamics of injustices because they have the resources to study them while being less personally affected. And just to add on to that, I guess, what would your advice be for BIPOC students out there or those who are not represented in the field of nutrition and public health? And if there are any, I guess, resources or things that you can point these students to?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I agree, that's something I've seen as well. And I think there's a lot that schools can do to support students of color. I think, again, the mentoring piece is key, and there's always this kind of systemic problem, like we can lack faculty mentors who have similar lived experiences and so forth, and we have to keep working on all fronts. If those who are not from underrepresented backgrounds really have an onus to dive in and learn as much as they can, listen to students, make best use of opportunities for mentoring and for things like having inclusive classrooms. There's a lot of resources available, so making use of those resources. We're all hugely busy and have so many demands on our time, so we have to make that a priority to solve this problem. And then, of course, being able to support faculty of color, and again, with both strong mentoring and with transparency in policies, so that it's not a mystery how to succeed in academia. So yeah, there's a lot of different answers, and it's like have to really address this on multiple fronts. And there's no easy solutions, but we have to do whatever we can.
Exactly, and I think that's a very good point about finding a good mentor or having other mentees to promote this, I guess, cultural sensitivity within the academia space, and just to promote diversity in our day-to-day conversations and learning, so that we really learn from each other and each other's cultures. And I guess another question, or maybe more general question, is what are kind of on small ways, what are actionable items that we can take to improve inclusion, and larger things like what's the larger goal that we really need to work towards, or work like a larger, I guess, smaller actionable items and then larger goals to promote diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. And we all have roles to play. Obviously the goal is, it's not only, there's an easy goal, in a way, easy goal of full representation. So there's full representation in all aspects of the research enterprise. But along with that, it's not just numbers, it's that feeling of belonging and that real feeling of inclusion. So we can't just bring numbers, there's power in numbers, but we also have to make sure that it's not a hostile environment. And many now experience academia as a hostile environment. And I think everyone in academia has to recognize just how hostile it can be. I think we get so acclimated to the environment that we lose sight of the ways that it is not healthy for others. And so I think we all have a part in trying to recognize that. And again, there's a lot of different trainings, there's a lot of different resources, especially right now, on how to achieve that. But I think the first thing is being aware and recognizing and working towards it. And that means every single day being mindful of how are you addressing the problem or contributing to it.
Exactly. Thank you so much. And I think, like you said, the trust and the awareness is so important, especially within the field of food nutrition and public health within academia, because food nutrition is in and of itself such a cultural and, I guess, at times a personal topic and issue. So I think those are really, really important points. And thank you so much for your presentation today and the great discussion. We're really walking away today with so many points to reflect upon and actions that we can even take starting tomorrow. And we're all a part of this effort to make the food nutrition field a place where equity is ingrained in both research and programming. And we do have a couple minutes left at this point. I would like to invite Professor Elena Namova, the chair of the Nutrition Epidemiology and Data Science Division, and professor at the Friedman School of Nutrition, as well as our faculty advisor for the symposium, for closing remarks. Welcome, Professor Elena Namova.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Sara, for such important and valuable insights, for highlighted direction and very timely priority. Thank you. This conference offer and will continue to offer a robust platform to share diverse range of topics, perspective on very pressing issue of nutrition, health, and well-being. And this conference, as you see, managed to showcase many methods, innovations, and recommendations from students and practitioners. And I hope you find something which resonates to your own thoughts and help you to advance your own ideas. I want to thank all the participants for making this conference a success, all moderators, invited speakers, students, presenters, and of course our keynote speakers, Alison Brown, Daniel Newlands, and Sara Folta. My special thank you will go to sponsors, including National Science Foundation and National Institute of Food and Agriculture, the International Barometric Society of the International Statistical Institute, Tufts Data Intensive Studies Center, American Statistical Association, its Boston chapter, and of course, students, Tufts student chapter of ASA. And our students, please don't forget, sign up. It's a wonderful organization. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to stay together as a professionals on a long run. I would like to thank support of Friedman community of alums and faculty who give us time and attention, to staff of students, communication and career services, to Matt Hask, Richard Moyer, Isabel McPhail, Lori Aoni, Annie Devane, Sarah Cronin, Andy Corbett, and of course, whole Tufts Technology Services. Without you guys, this conference is impossible to run. My special thanks will go to organizers for building agenda, thinking of questions to guide conversation, developing communication streams, troubleshooting, and keeping all of us informed and fully engaged for the last 3 months. Jessie Lan, Emily Sanchez, Emily Ayani Izaki, Helen Zane, Caroline Andrews, Brianne Landolis, Suzanne Gerber, and of course, Ryan Simpson. Thank you very much for being the heart and the soul of this conference. As we live in such a difficult time and a very divided world, my personal plea for everyone, please be willing to listen different point of view. Please don't rush to judge. Please be proactive in offering help, kindness, your knowledge, your skills, and be safe whenever you are. Thank you very much again and see you next year.
Thank you, Professor Elena Namova, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this year. We'll be sending out an exit survey soon, so please be on the lookout for that. And that's a wrap for this year's Tufts Research and Data Symposium for Food and Nutrition. We hope to see you next year.